Let me tell you a story. It's about a superpower sitting at the very peak of its glory, totally and completely untouchable. Or so they thought. And then, almost in the blink of an eye, it completely self-destructed. Now, this all happened thousands of years ago, but the reasons why it happened, well, they feel eerily familiar today.
So that's the big question we're tackling today. How does that even happen? We're going to dive into 8th century BC Israel, a nation that looked like it had it all figured out, only to lose absolutely everything in a flash. What went so wrong?
To really understand the fall, you first have to appreciate the incredible heights from which they fell. We're talking about the reign of a king named Jeroboam II. For nearly half a century, 46 years, Israel was on top of the world. The regional bully Assyria was surprisingly quiet for a while, which meant both Israel and its southern neighbor Judah got to enjoy this amazing period of peace and, you guessed it, prosperity. I mean, on the surface, everything looked incredible.
But the moment Jeroboam died, that stability just shattered. It's actually insane how fast it all unraveled. His son takes the throne, right? He lasts 6 months. He gets assassinated. The guy who killed him, he only lasts 6 months before he gets assassinated. The whole nation just plunged into chaos. You had different factions literally killing each other for the throne. And of course, just as Israel is at its absolute weakest, a brand new, super aggressive Assyrian king comes to power. The clock was officially ticking.
So what in the world happened? This is where the prophet Hosea comes in. And he has this stunning diagnosis. Israel's greatest strength, all that wealth and prosperity, was the very thing that led to its downfall. You know, it's funny. Hundreds of years before this, Moses had warned them about this exact trap. It's like he saw it coming. He basically said, hey, when you guys finally get into the good land with big cities you didn't have to build and houses full of stuff you didn't have to buy, you're going to be so tempted to forget where it all came from. And that is precisely what happened.
This right here is the heart of the problem that Hosea saw. The more fruitful Israel became, the more altars they built to other gods. The more their land prospered, the more money they poured into their fancy idols. They literally took the gifts God had given them, the grain, the wine, the oil, and used them as offerings to the Baals. They were using God's own blessings to worship his rivals.
But that just brings up an even deeper question, doesn't it? Why? Why would a nation that was so blessed turn its back on the very source of all those blessings? It just doesn't seem to make sense.
I mean, really think about that for a second. It's completely illogical, right? As you get more successful, more comfortable, why would you take all that extra income and spend it on idols instead of being thankful to the God who gave you that success in the first place?
The answer? It all comes down to this one single powerful human drive: control.
And this really gets to the core of what idolatry is all about. See, an idol is something you feel like you can manage. You can bring it gifts, you can dress it up, you feel like you're in charge, like you can make it do what you want. But a relationship with the true God, well, that can be kind of scary because you can't make God do anything. It requires you to surrender control, to trust a God you can't even see.
And a lot of people just aren't willing to make that kind of surrender. So what did Israel do? They put their trust in things they could see, things they could manage. They trusted in a big, shiny golden bowl statue. They made these cynical backroom deals and alliances with superpowers like Assyria and Egypt, trusting their own political games instead of trusting God. And this choice, this desperate demand for control, well, it was about to lead to some absolutely devastating and unavoidable consequences. Hosea just draws a straight line. He says it plainly, because you depended on your own strength, on your own smarts, on your own money, the result is going to be total military destruction. The very things they were trusting in to keep them safe were going to be their ruin.
So Hosea lays out these two really clear paths, kind of like a farmer planting a field. Path number 1, you can sow righteousness, do the right thing, and in return you'll reap chesed, which is this amazing Hebrew word for God's loyal, faithful, covenant love. Or path number 2, you can plant wickedness, and if you do that, you will inevitably reap disaster and the bitter fruit of your own deception.
And Hosea doesn't leave it to the imagination. He spells out exactly what that harvest of disaster will look like. You know that big, imposing golden calf they were so proud of? It's going to be humiliatingly dragged off to Assyria as a trophy. Their king? Totally powerless, swept away like a little twig in a flood. Even their strongest, most fortified cities will be completely overrun. And the people will be ashamed,
which in the Bible means the thing you put all your trust in has just publicly, epically failed you.
Okay, now here is where this ancient story gets truly fascinating. It doesn't just end back in 722 BC. Nope. It echoes down through the centuries, and it reveals this timeless, deeply human pattern.
At the height of the Assyrian invasion, when everything is collapsing, Hosea predicts that the people are going to be so terrified of the consequences they've brought on themselves that they will literally cry out for the mountains to fall on them just to hide them from the judgment.
And get this, that exact same cry of despair, it doesn't just show up this one time. It echoes through 3 huge moments of judgment in the Bible. First, right here, with the fall of Israel. Then, centuries later, Jesus himself quotes this exact line when he's predicting the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And finally, it shows up again in the book of Revelation to describe the terror of the final judgment.
And think about what that cry actually reveals. It's not a cry of repentance. They're not saying, God forgive us, we messed up. It's a cry to escape, to be hidden from the fallout of their own actions. It shows this deep-seated human instinct. When we're caught, our first reaction is often to run and hide from judgment, rather than to turn around and face it. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Israel built this impressive system to control their own destiny, wealth, a strong military, clever political alliances. And when it all came crashing down, their instinct was to hide. So it forces us to ask ourselves, when the things that we depend on for control in our own lives, our jobs, our money, our 5-year plans, when they inevitably fail, what is our first instinct? Is it to hide from the failure? Or is it to turn to the one who remains, the one who asked for our trust all along?